In this video, I'm going to be going over Edexcel art and design assessment criteria. So going over how your teachers and moderators will mark your art coursework and your exam work, but I'm not going to talk about the personal study, which is the essay part of it. But I will briefly talk about, how many marks it's worth. So this is the this is for the A level as well, no longer AS. So each assessment objective, you've got 4 assessment objectives, 1, 2, 3, 4, and each are out of 18, giving you a total of 72. So your main component 1, which is your personal investigation, your practical project, of course with annotation, comes to 72. Your personal study, and this is just at the bottom of this sheet here, so component 1 is out of 72, and you've got that out of 18 for your personal study, which is your essay. So that is like a fifth of your coursework essentially. So that brings your total coursework to 90 marks. And then component 2 is your externally set assignment, and that is out of 2 using the same assessment criteria to bring that there. So they aren't equal, although technically these 2 projects are equal. So I will be looking at each of the assessment objectives and going through each of those and what you'd be expected to get for a C, what you'd be expected to get B, A star, etc. Just to explain basically what all of those are. So you've got the 6 levels, and they don't tell you whether they are A, B, C or D, because essentially the grade boundaries might change. So the examining board will never tell you that, but I will show you what they have, what the grades have been, at least in 2019. So when we're reading these here, it says, for example, limited ability to explore and select appropriate intentions, basic ability to explore and select appropriate intentions, right up to exceptional ability to explore and select appropriate to intentions. So what is exceptional ability? What is the difference between exceptional and confident and assured? And what does emerging competence look like? These are quite vague statements. It tells you that you need to be able to explore and select appropriate to intentions, which, okay, does kind of tell you what to do. But Edexcel give you another sheet here. So this is the performance calculator. And this is designed to help teachers and moderators actually mark the work. So we still have the 4 assessment objectives, the others are on the other sheet, but it gives us actual descriptive words for what you'd have to do to get that. So basic ability, you might use words to describe that, such as straightforward, deliberate, just adequate, methodical, superficial, unrefined, lacks understanding and focus. So those are, you can tell that those are slightly on the negative side. And now the way this works is if, for example, you work all of the things in this box, in this level 3 box, so it's predictable, broadening, makes progress, and that pretty much sums it up if we, depending on which assessment objective. So if we're looking at develop ideas and you're all of those, then you would be an 8. If you were most of those, but you did have a few elements of this, then you'd be a 9. If you were most of this, but you still had a few elements of that, you'd be a 7. And that applies to each box. So that's where you are on each box exactly. So to make this a little bit more relevant to the grades, I've just basically put where the grade boundaries were for 2019. And of course, it doesn't mean it's not quite exactly on 11, for example. It doesn't mean if you get all 11s, you're going to get a B. In fact, sometimes you could submit the same piece of work one year and it'd get an A, and then you could submit it the next year and it'd get a B. It could be exact same piece of work, exact same number marks, but it's going to be a different grade possibly, but that doesn't change too much. And for the last few years, I don't think it's changed at all. And if anything, it might change by 1 mark. That's quite typical of these things, unless they go and change the whole spec. But this is already fairly new, so I'm not expecting it to change anytime soon. So essentially, if you got 12s, and this of course includes your essay as well. So if you got for your first component, you got all 12s. If you got a 12 for your essay, and then a 12 for each of your assessment objectives in your exam as well, then you'd be looking at getting a B. But of course, if you got all 12s for your coursework, but then for your exam you got all 15s, you might see that averaging around a high B. You might scrape an A or something. It depends. You'd have to work it out exactly and see whether the total matches up to this is the, so that they are the grade boundaries from 2019. That's what you need for an E, that's what you need for a D, C, B, A star. And that's for the A level. Okay, so now I'm going to go into detail with each of the assessment objectives. So first I'll start with AO1, and just to mention, you do not need to, when you're doing your project, you don't necessarily do these in order, and they do cross over a lot. So if you do one particular task, let's say you do a double page of experiments with media and techniques, for example, that doesn't necessarily mean you're just going to be meeting assessment objective 2. You might also be showing development in your work. You might also be showing your ability to record your ideas. So one kind of exercise, one page of work can tick multiple boxes. So assessment objective 1 says, develop ideas through sustained and focused investigations informed by contextual and other sources, demonstrating analytical and critical understanding. Now, this can be shown through your written work. So where it says, for example, you need to show a demonstration of your analytical and critical understanding. So the first thing that you might think of is an artist analysis, an artwork analysis, really looking at in detail at an artist's work. Now, of course, if you had that throughout your book, maybe you had it consistently throughout your book, but you are pretty much just finding information off of Wikipedia and writing that down. Even if it was to a fairly thorough quality, as you can see in level 3 emerging competent ability, where we're looking at kind of a C grade here, it says description, not explanation. So potentially, really, if you were all of those things, you'd be getting not even a C. If you're just describing the work and not actually going into depth and analysing it, then you're not even going to be getting a C. So if we look further up here, so let's go up to where kind of an A is. Highly inventive, critical, perceptive, comprehensive, in-depth. So you wouldn't be able to get in this level 5 without having in-depth analysis. So these words will link to whatever we're talking about here. So if we're saying, right, do they develop ideas through sustained and focused investigations? Are they informed by contextual and other sources? So contextual and other sources. It wants you to draw upon the context of, this isn't just looking at an artist's work. You might also look at the context of politics at that time. You might look at your own work in context, so whatever your theme is. If your theme, for example, is technology, are you putting that in context? If you've got a theme such as transformation was one of them a while ago, and are you going to look at, I don't know, if you were looking at sort of like gender transformation, are you going to look and actually do some research just in that area that's not art related? And by the way, this doesn't link just to art, this is also photography, graphics, whatever you're doing. Does it actually link to, you know, have you actually really gone out and looked? So in depth. And then what have we got up here? Genuine discovery, unique, authoritative, fully informed. So in depth and then fully informed. So completely, like, have you got anything else you could possibly research, or have you really gone into depth on that one thing? And it doesn't mean breadth and looking into full-on research on every single thing on your first mind map that you do, for example. But you need to really, once you have got that kind of theme, that specific thing, really go into depth in whatever that is. Really research, and don't just research and write down facts. You need to, it says, to be critical. So analyse them and be critical of them. So, you know, question things. And that is one of those things that's up with A star up here. Actually question the research. Say, well, should it be like this? You know, like, add your opinions to it. And they need to be of a high level. It doesn't mean just like, oh, I like this because blah, blah, blah. You need to really, you might even look at kind of like art philosophy, and some kind of theories on things, theories and thoughts on a particular topic, especially with your essay. And of course, you know, your writing in your practical work can help with your essay a lot. So, yeah, that really comes across with that. So you also, it's not just about the written work. So you can show analytical and critical understanding through your own work. So you could show that you are analysing artist's work by your practical responses. So if you may not have written down that you understand that the artist uses brushstrokes to convey, I don't know, a certain feel or mood or something, but in your work, if you show that in your own work and the examiner can see that, then they know that you have an understanding of that. You know, this is a visual subject, so do not let, you know, writing cannot replace your visual work. You need to visually be able to do something. It's no good not visually showing something, but then showing that you've got you know, you're really good at writing essays and you can explain stuff. You need to actually visually show that as much as possible in your work, and that probably will come across. If you do, you know, it's really important that you do this at the time. There's no good just going back through your book and annotating it, because you won't have then, the idea of you annotating your work and looking at artists in detail is so that you actually can draw upon those things and decide what to do next, and what to put in your work and how to improve your work as you're doing it. Whereas if you've done the practical work and then you go back and you decide to write about your work, you might actually come up with some really good points and thoughts about things that you could do, but you've already then done the practical work. So it's always really obvious, you know, to see whether it's just been done for the sake of it. And you've also got things, you know, lower down here we've got things like predictable, straightforward, deliberate. You know, it's very like done for the sake of it. So really be careful about that. You know, if your teacher's telling you to do your annotation as you go along, it's not, you know, just for the sake of you keeping up with your work. It's actually informing your practical work. So yeah, assessment objective 1, it's mostly about how good your analytical and critical understanding is, but also it's about how you develop your ideas for your practical work. And it's really about showing that journey. So developing from the start of your book right through to the end, are you actually showing that development? And we could also look at things like independent, you know, are you developing your work independently? You know, is there a genuine creative journey there? And so on. So it's not just all kind of methodical. Here we've got things, yeah, like straightforward, partial. You know, of course, if we're looking down here, this isn't a pass. If you're getting 1s and 2s, that you're probably very unlikely to pass it. You've got to be getting at least 3s to get a pass in this. Naive, lacks skills, little creative intent, disjointed. So maybe things don't flow from one to another. Weak connections is here as well. So right, on to assessment objective 2. That is to explore and select appropriate resources, media, materials, techniques and processes, reviewing and refining work ideas as work develops. So a lot of this is very practical, and of course there is the element of reviewing and refining your work. So review, that could be in a written form. You could write about your work, reviewing it, but this is very, very much practical. Exploring media, and that doesn't mean try like every single different media out. This is A level, you've probably tried a lot of different media at GCSE. Don't feel like you have to just go and try different media for the sake of it. If you really know and you know it's not appropriate, and that is one of the key things here, I have to highlight that, appropriate, got to develop, appropriate to your work. So it's not that you're just trying anything for the sake of it. You're thinking, right, what helps me get this message across? What is going to help me get this effect? If you're doing something even like technical, like photorealism, what media is actually going to help you achieve that? There is no point using, I don't know, a media that isn't going to help you achieve that. There's no point you trying it out and then just going, oh yeah, see, this didn't work in your book. There's just no point. You're better off actually using media that does work and say, well, this technique didn't work, this way of applying this didn't work. Really, really like scrutinise the difference between, like a 4B pencil and a 6B pencil. Like what are the differences between those? What are the differences between the way that you've used like a blending stump or something? Just really, 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 this is how we're getting these grades up here, and that's how you actually produce better work, by scrutinising what you're doing and trying to perfect it. So this idea of refining is really, think of it as like perfecting your work. But that doesn't also mean to have a super realistic piece of work, for example. For when you're looking at a B grade here, it says skillful. And now skillful doesn't necessarily mean realism. So don't get bogged down thinking that it has to be real looking or technical. So if you're doing photography, don't feel like you have to produce a technically good photograph. You could, for example, there's no reason why you couldn't have a great project with, I don't know, by giving your small like sister a disposable camera or something, allowing her to go around and take a load of pictures for the day. Like, if that links to your theme and you want to create like a nostalgic, childlike, fun images or something, and that's one of your methods of exploring that, then that's fine. It doesn't mean that you have to go out taking, all these technical lighting photographs and everything. You don't have to do that. And same with fine art and drawing and painting. It doesn't have to be realistic, but it's about what's appropriate for what you're doing. And it also comes into AO3, which I'll talk about in a minute, where it says relevant to intention. So it's all about what is relevant to what you're doing. So resources, media, materials, techniques and processes. So it's not just the media. I think a lot of people get caught up with just trying media out or trying different colours out, colour schemes. Really trying different techniques and processes and show how you're doing them. Show the examiner, they're not going to know that you've done something on Photoshop and you've played around with it in loads of different ways, but then you've just stuck with this final picture. They're not going to know your process and what you did. So really show the process of what you're doing. That is simply to show the examiner. So maybe you'll take some screenshots of what you're doing if you're doing digital work. A good idea with physical like drawings or something is to maybe photocopy as you're going along. And actually that's a really good way to speed things up. So if you're maybe starting a drawing, you can photocopy it and then you can work back into the original, and then you've still got that other one there. So especially if you do something to kind of mess it up a little bit, you've still got that kind of other piece of work that you spent ages on. Of course it's a photocopy, but that's really good to get extra work in and show, and just show what you're already doing anyway, because you're probably already doing this. If anyone sits down and does a drawing or takes photos, you're going to play around with layouts and you're going to try different things that maybe some people fall short when they don't actually just, show it. So again, we link up to these words. So is your exploration surprising and unique? Are you trying really different things, or are you just sticking with the same thing, you know, could you try, if you're painting, could you try painting on acetate or something? You know, just try something a little bit different, a bit more inventive. Could you paint onto 3D objects? Could you make sculptures from your paintings? Could you make a sculpture and then paint from that? You know, just try things that are a little bit different. So that's pretty much AO2. So AO3 is record ideas, observations and insights relevant to intentions, reflecting critically on work and progress. So this is, again, both quite a bit of practical, but also a bit of written. Really, you could even say that it's not any of the written work, but it is saying about reflecting critically on your work. So this is when really you annotating your work, you know, your own work, and explaining, you're reflecting on it, and this is not describing. So again, we're going to this description. In fact, I'm going to highlight this. That's something you don't want to do. You want to be looking up here. There's no reason that anyone at A-level should be just describing something and not really explaining it. So you really, you know, there's no good just annotating your work saying, well, I did this here I used pencil, here I used paint. Okay, and what? Like, what about it? Go into more detail. What do you think about that? Did it work the way that you wanted to? It's really evaluative questioning rather than you know, just explaining or describing what you've done. So up here, if we're looking at A star or even A for reflecting critically, we've got, so of course you've got to be critical to be getting an A. Coherent is kind of about, you know, being clear, informed, some perception. Also, this idea of perception comes in a lot, and that could link to really anything, but perception is you having a vision of where your project is going. So, you know, really always thinking about kind of what you're going to do in the future and how this is helping you get to your end goal. So always, you know, especially with things like graphics where you might have, you know, from the very beginning you've been given a brief and you know that you are going to create, I don't know, a CD cover at the end or something like that. Something, you know, maybe a lookbook, a fashion lookbook of some sort. Whatever that is, everything that you do, you're thinking, right, how does it link with this? You're being perceptive and always seeing how it's going to take you to that point, because you're not expecting to just come out with your final piece straight away. But and if that's art, you might, or photography even, you might think about a message that you're trying to get across. So constantly referring to that, and are you getting that message across? And again, here we've got questioning. Be really questioning that. Well, is that actually the way that I'm trying to do it? You know, really scrutinise it. So that's about, you know, all to do with reflecting on your work as well. Is it actually going to take you towards your end goal? So being perceptive. If you've just got no idea really where you're going, you're just doing stuff because, oh, well, I'm just going to respond to this artist just because I like the look of it or something, or it kind of links to my theme. Okay, but where is this actually going? Like, what do you want to have at the end? And it doesn't mean you have to know for sure, but you should really have some, even if it's a message that you're going to try and get across. You don't know what form that message is going to be in, but eventually you will know, and you're going to get closer and closer to that idea as you go on. It's also about your ability to record ideas and observations. So how well do you record those ideas? Is your book clear enough? If your book, where do we see coherent? You know, this should be really clearly documented in your work. You know, how it should be, and actually a helpful thing would be to show someone maybe that doesn't do an art and design subject, maybe that's a family member or a friend or something, and show them and just see what they think, and do they understand what's going on? Because if they don't, then you might need to make those areas clearer, because if they're not, of course the examiner might get it a little bit better, but you can't just assume that they don't know what's going on in your head. So you need to really make everything really clear, what you're thinking, where your ideas are at, and so on. And part of that, recording your ideas, observations, and insights, recording your thoughts, and that's not just in a written form. That's if you've got this idea about your project, you've got this theory, this concept that you're working with, then are you getting that across? If you've got a certain audience that you're trying to market for or something, with your graphics work, if you're aiming at a certain audience, are you actually doing the right things? And this relevant to intentions is really, really important with that as well. What are your intentions with your project? If your intentions, especially, let's use photorealism as an example again. If you have set out that you are going to do photorealism, really realistic, drawing the paintings, but then your work doesn't look realistic, it might actually have a really nice style to it. Maybe you're using like really different experimental brushstrokes or something. It might look like a great piece, but you get marked for what you set out to do. So if you set out to do photorealism, you don't want to have any fancy brushstrokes, you want to just really make it look as real as possible, like a photo, and you don't achieve that, then you're kind of setting yourself up to fail. So maybe your intentions in that case need to be that you're going to be looking at expressive brushstrokes and things. Make your intentions match to kind of the work that you are producing as well. Sometimes you do need to go back and kind of change that just to make that the two match up. And finally, assessment objective 4, it says present a personal and meaningful response that realises intentions and, where appropriate, makes connections between visual and other elements. And here it just says embraces outcomes, responses with connections to sources, just to really make that extra clear. So that's really about your outcomes and your responses with connections to your sources. So it doesn't necessarily mean connections to your artists, and it doesn't mean you have to kind of make a direct copy of their work or add their style to your work really blatantly. But it's just showing that connection. It should be a developed connection. It shouldn't be like that you're just blatantly trying to replicate someone else's work. If you do that well, you can still get a decent grade, but if you really want to, push it up here, then it needs to be unique, sensitive, creative. You are doing something, you tried out a certain style, maybe from an artist, or it tends to be better with if you try out a certain concept from an artist. Maybe an artist is using a concept or exploring an idea behind their work. Or maybe you've got a different idea, but you're just picking out on their style, rather than trying to get the concept and style and everything from an artist and just kind of replicating it in your own way. You really want to kind of end up creating and becoming your own artist and your own having your own theme. So personal and meaningful is really important in this, which is why really at the very start of your project, it's a good idea to pick something that is personal and meaningful, whether that links to certain interests that you have, or it doesn't necessarily have to be about your life. It doesn't mean, but it could be sort of an autobiographical project of some sort, things that you do in your life every day, things that have happened to you. But it could also just be anything that you've just got a real fascination with, because that really, really comes across to examiners. And any A's and A stars, or particularly A stars that I've seen, have really come from like that. But you can just really see that person's genuine interest in what they're doing and their genuine love of what they're doing, rather than it being, it doesn't look like it's a chore. So yeah, try and get that across. And that can be tricky. I think people find that hard with graphics and things like that. With the personal and meaningful response, it's a little bit easier with art, I think. But you can link it to things that you like, but really just put your energy into it, and that should come across. So that realises your intentions. So again, we're going back to this idea of intentions. It's got to be right. What did you set out at the start of the project, especially with graphics when you're going to have probably a fairly specific brief? Are you actually matching that? Because you might have created something great in the end, but you're not going to get the marks for it if it doesn't actually match what you set out to do. Because in the real world, especially if you're I don't know, if someone's asked you to design a logo for a certain company and they want it to be kind of like this and aimed at this target market and stuff, you might then create a really, really great logo that'd be great for a different company, but it doesn't match what you've been set out to do, then it's not going to work. So again, if you wanted to see where that was, then you just look up here and be like, right, is it very literal? Have you taken, you know, the brief very, very literally and not done anything that's up here like surprising and unique? Have you, let's have a look up here, have you done it independently, realised, sensitive, creative, sustained? So that sustained, is that really, really thorough and going on for, you know, a longer project? Highly inventive, critical, perceptive. So again, that if you're perceptive from the start, then you're going to really, really help yourself with that. Yeah, and of course makes connections between visual and other elements. So your visual work, is it connecting with your written work? Is it connecting with the research that you had at the start of your project? And so on. So a suggestion I would make after this is to get yourself a copy of this and maybe highlight, I don't know, look at your current grade maybe that you've been given, or highlight the area that you want to be at. So maybe if you're currently at a C and you want to achieve a B, then maybe just highlight those words, or maybe write them down and put them on a post-it note and kind of pin them up somewhere, so that whenever you're doing your work, you can be like, right, is what I'm doing effective? Is it diversive? Is it purposeful? You know, actually, does this have a purpose to it? Or am I just doing it for the sake of it, just to add some extra stuff in randomly, even though I don't really need to? Like, how can I make this purposeful? Skillful, coherent, imaginative, you know, or is it that imaginative, or should I maybe do this instead? Really think about those words whenever you're doing whatever you're doing. So if it's written work, if it's practical work, if you're exploring, if you're developing your work, whatever that is, just have those words in mind. And maybe there's one particular assessment objective you need to achieve that in. Maybe you're really high up with your ability to record and control over the formal elements. Maybe you're really like up here with that, but maybe your analytical and critical understanding is down here and you want to be up there, and you just want to maybe pick a few words out: genuine, discovery, accepting of the unexpected, challenging. So maybe you need to challenge some of the views and opinions that you're reading about. Maybe you are reading I don't know, something like an art philosophy book of some sort, and you want to challenge those theories in some way, or challenge your own work, and maybe think about how it can reflect those things. Synthesis of ideas, so like clarity and of those ideas. Fully informed, questioning, sophisticated, fluent skills, intuitive. So again, that's that idea of perceptive and seeing where it's going, and daring. So are you kind of taking any risks? Are you trying something, you know, really, really different? This really does, for an A-star, have to be really, really something different, really interesting for the examiner to see, something that they won't have seen before. And then not only that, but executed really well as well.